There we go.
So here we are in, actually, if you look at the title, it's Uncertain Dots Fly, episode 16. I didn't know how to put that in there, but I mean, we could do fly, uncertain dots, but I just put it at the end. So
Yeah.
We'll try something new today. We'll have a new guest. So, of course, I'm Rhett, Allain, and you guys can introduce yourself in case people don't know who you are.
I'm Chad Orzel, and Andy.
I'm Andy Superfly Rundquist, and I was invited to come today, I think, because I do a bunch of standards-based grading stuff. So
yeah,
we can talk about that.
Yeah. So I don't know how we got started on that conversation, but I think it was probably Chad talking about grading and how he set up his course, and people always like talking about how we do our own courses, in particular about grades. So, Andy, do you want to say anything about standard-based grading, or
Sure.
give a brief overview of what it is for people that don't know?
Sure. So what happened with me is I realized that I was kind of frustrated with more traditional grading styles, and I think that I wanted to find a way that would be as authentic as possible, and frankly the most authentic thing that I knew of was oral exams. And so we had been doing a ton of oral exams in my department. Basically from sophomore year on, every student does an oral exam for every single exam. And so our students got really good at that, and I was frustrated with the inauthentic nature of homework and written exams and things like that. And so the notion of being able to give students, a threshold, say, hey, show me you've learned this, and you can find any way you want to show me you've learned this, and you can have as many opportunities as possible, but you have to know it, and you need to continue to know it by the end of the semester, which is a huge deal for me. And so I sort of jumped into the deep end of the pool for standards-based grading, and really haven't turned back. I've taught it now for, I don't know, maybe 4 years, of classes ranging from non-majors through advanced majors courses.
So about how many majors are you dealing with? If you're doing oral exams for everybody, how many students is that typically?
Yeah, so I mean, we graduate, around 10 a year. And in a typical class, it's a every other year taught class. So I might have 15 to 18 people in there. But I also did oral exams for a non-majors course, and that was with 40 students.
Yeah, so that's got to. So how long an oral exam is it if you're doing 40 students?
15 minutes.
So, yeah, so that's 10 hours worth of oral.
Yes. So I canceled class and I canceled lab that week, and so it was 1 week's worth of contact hours.
So.
Oh, that works out. So I think Kelly's here. Yeah, okay, Kelly came. So we have Kelly here too.
Hi.
Yep.
Yay,
Well,
Kelly made it.
So. Yeah, so talking about standards-based grading it is actually well timed because today we had an exam last week in our Intro E&M class that I'm teaching, and I'm doing standards-based grading. And so today I just gave them their I printed out the sheets, the spreadsheet with the grades on it, and did the here are your scores on all the standards for all the assessments, and here is that converted to a letter grade over here, because they seem to want the reassurance of how that conversion is done. And I actually had a student come up to me after class and say, this is a superior grading system, but the transition is really rough.
Yeah.
And he specifically wanted for all the assignments, said that it would be more useful to have like the full standard description written out on all of them, which I suppose I could do. I've just been doing, I gave them a list and then I give them codes
Sure.
for the standards when I hand stuff back. But I'm still very much doing, homework handed in on paper that I grade, in-class quizzes, and we do common exams because we cap our intro courses at sections of 18, and then we offer, we're offering 5 sections this term of Intro E&M, and so there's 3 other people teaching it.
Right.
So now we have Kelly here. Kelly, would you like to go ahead and share your ideas about whatever you want about standard-based grading, either how you do it or why, or what you would say?
Sure. I guess I was talking about this with students lately, so I could talk about why pretty easily. Um, I like as a student, I never had any test anxiety at all, but as a teacher, I have huge test anxiety. So, like my first couple of years teaching, like first of all, I didn't know what I was doing, so I was terrible at it. But I was not sleeping the nights before I gave tests, and at some point, I kind of realized, like, wait, I'm in charge of this. Like, I should be able to find a better way. So between that and like reading uh, blog posts of people and sort of the information was out there, and it seemed like there must be a better way to do this. Like, I should know how my students are going to do before they take something that counts for that much that I would be that nervous about, you know.
Did you get like the exam anxiety dreams, like the one where you,
Oh yeah.
you show up and you're
I can't find the room. I don't know what room.
You can't find the room. You don't have the papers. You're not wearing pants.
As a student, I never experienced that at all. But as a teacher, it's just like it's out of my control once I start. So I would get really nervous about it. But I get less nervous about exams and stuff now because it's not very surprising how they're going to do. If anything, there are like some pleasant surprises of like, oh, they finally got that last piece to that idea or something. But nobody who's like was doing well is going to all of a sudden do terribly if they tested on the things a bunch of times. Like they know that they know it, and you know that they know it, which is good. So it becomes more about like big exams and stuff become more about a performance than about even an assessment in some ways.
So really, what got you upset before was that you were worried that your students wouldn't perform well, right? And so now you're saying the way you assess them beforehand, you kind of know what they're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, so I give quizzes every week, basically, and I don't know necessarily what they're going to do on those. Like, I intentionally am giving them stuff that I think is a little bit beyond what they're ready to do, because what's the point of giving them something that I know they'll do well on? Neither of us learns anything from that. And because it's just like an ongoing process, they're going to test everything multiple times, then I don't have to worry about I'm going to give them something too hard and it's going to hurt people's averages, or they're going to be so incredibly upset by it because they know it's just the first of many times that they're testing on it. So in those, I don't necessarily know exactly how they're going to do, but on like a semester exam or something, I know pretty well how they're, like what to expect their work to look like, and then it's just like enjoyable to read through the exams and see what kind of, because I give them goalless problems on the exams, and so I don't know exactly what they'll do for a question as opposed to like not knowing if they will know things. Which is nice.
So who came up with the goalless problems? Did you start that, or did someone else start that?
I got it from Matt Greenwald.
Oh, okay. But I love that idea that just here's something and there's no question, just figure something out, right? That's the whole basis behind a goalless problem.
Yeah, the kids like love them and hate them at the same time.
I mean, at first, did they have a very difficult transition problem going to a goalless problem, thinking, well, we don't know what you want us to do, and after a while they got better, or the whole time they hated it?
Oh, well, I mean, it's every year you start over, but it's like some kids never really like it. They're always going to feel uncomfortable by any kind of situation where you aren't just telling them do this, then do this, and then do this, but that's kind of a larger issue. And other kids, it's funny, like later in the year, they'll be halfway through doing a problem, then they'll look up and be like, oh, is this a goalless problem? Because they've just started, their approach to things now is so much better. Like their first thing that they do is start modeling the situation, drawing diagrams, and setting things up, and then they go back and look to see what they should be calculating, which is like such a great way to approach things. But because of all the goalless problems, I think they do that just inherently and then don't even realize that it's a goalless problem yet.
Do you find it more difficult to assess their performance on a goalless problem, or is it easier? Do you find it easier to assess on a goalless problem?
I think it's different. So usually I don't use goalless problems for assessments until the exam. Usually that's more like a lot of what we do in class will be goalless problems, but on a quiz I would give them a goal. And partially even for time reasons, because they could spend the rest of their lives basically on a goalless problem. And the exam, it's really fun for me. There's usually how I've done in the past is a good portion of the exam is sort of normal problems or like bigger problems, and then the end of it is like choose one or two of these goalless things, and it's kind of like a performance. It's like just a display.
Recital, like a physics recital.
Yeah, it's kind of like a physics recital. It's fun. Like the exams in the past have been stories about my students and what happens to them in the future, Like some of them are good and some are evil and they battle each other and stuff, and it ends with like to be continued on the spring exam and then continues. And the story never makes that much sense, but it's all just kind of inside jokes. But it's funny because in the goalless problems, it will be about people in the class. And one kid last year just came up to me after the first, in January, after the first exam. He says, "I'm having a philosophical crisis." And I was like, "Okay, well, what's that?" And he said, "Oh, I really thought I didn't like physics. I really enjoyed that exam." And part of why he enjoyed it was because he found like 4 different ways to save one person while killing off this other person in your class, which no one actually dies on the exam, but you know, like there's a situation, you're not sure how it's going to end because it's going to be continued. So he really enjoyed that for some reason and got into it.
So I've been working with Peter Bohacek on this direct measurement video stuff that he does. And one of the things that I think that is the really cool direction of what they're working on now is kind of like taking the philosophy of the goalless problems into direct measurement videos. So his first videos were, you know, here's a situation, here's every measurement you need to have, go prove that, you know, momentum is conserved. And now he's like, look, here's an incredibly highly detailed video, and here's some tools you could use to make length measurements and time measurements. See what you want to do with it. And I think that he's seeing a lot of interesting results with students doing that.
Well, really, when he does it that way, it turns into more of a just video analysis problem. You know, it could be any video then, right? Except that it's set up nice and it's got good, you know, no perspective errors and stuff like that.
Right, exactly. And so they work really hard to make sure that there's no extraneous crap that's in the video to make it so that the students can get right to the measurements they want and not have to do, like you say, the perspective changes or anything else like that.
Yeah, that stuff's so annoying. I would do way more video demos and things if it were just, you know, if I could just shoot video and then do it. And then every time I do that, I end up like, oh crap, the moving thing is the same color as this thing in the background, and so it vanishes for 8 frames, and you got to, you know, and so that's really hard to do well.
It's too hard to make. That's why you should just use Peter's direct measurement videos for those kind of things. I don't use the tracker video in class because students find it too tedious. I mean, I love it as a tool, but for them, they think it's too much just clicking on the buttons and stuff, and they don't really see the physics. But I think the direct measurement videos work a lot better.
Something else, though, that Kelly said really makes me think about why I like standards-based grading so much, right? If it's a goalless problem, or if it's a direct measurement video problem, or if it's a essay that they write, or it's them talking to you in the hallway, right? If you're using a relatively straightforward assessment scheme, like did you know it or not, a binary scheme, or I usually use a 4-level scheme, it's great because I don't care what they do. I don't care if it's goalless, I don't care if it's goalless, I don't care if it's a video analysis, I don't care if it's some crazy lab. I'm able to say, look, you have this pretty well, but you haven't nailed it, or you've nailed it. And so my grading, I feel, is so much, I don't know if it takes me less time, but it's so much of a better measurement, right? I can say, well, you're a 3 or a 4. For me, a 3 means you've got it, and a 4 means you've really done a good job. And so when I'm handing out a 2 or a 1, it's like, look, you just mailed it in. A 3, you know, I can tell you have this, but there's a few details that you're missing, and a 4 means you've nailed it. And what's fantastic is if I have a goalless problem on there and every single student in the classroom does it a different way, it doesn't actually impact how long it takes me to grade it. It's not like I'm looking for the same exact number at the bottom of the page like I used to.
So how much constraints do you guys have in terms of other people in your departments or schools? Because, you know, one of the constraints that we operate under is, like I said, we cap our intro sections at a very small size, and we're running many of them in parallel. So, like, I'm teaching 1 of 5 sections, which means, you know, doing the standards-based thing is a little risky because this year I couldn't sell the other 3 people who are teaching it on the idea. One guy was going to do it, and then, like, a week into the term was like, this is too complicated, and went back to traditional grading. Right. So, you know, it's a little risky, but I have tenure, so I can, you know, if I get comments that just complain endlessly about the grading scheme, then, you know, it doesn't actually affect all that much. And that's the whole point of having tenure, right? Is that I can play around, I can try different things. But I wonder how much does the non-standard, you know, the standards-based grading or the goalless problems, how much do you get pushback from other people in your departments, or are they also into the same things?
I'll go first. I don't have any overlap with grading. I can do whatever I want. I do standards-based grading, and no, it doesn't bother anyone. No one complains. No one complains. So, well, no one complains more than normal. Okay.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, it kind of shapes the complaints you're going to get.
Yeah.
So.
Andy and Kelly, what about you?
Go ahead, Kelly.
Well, it's a difficult question for me to answer because I will have been at 3 schools in 3 years starting next year. So it's been different places. When I started it at the school I came from previously, where I was for 6 years, it was very easy. Like, everybody just did what I did, so it was fine. And in physics, at least. And it was fine in the school culture to do anything weird I wanted to do. But this year I've continued to do it, but I've gotten so much pushback from various places that I've made compromises that I'm like okay with. I mean, they're compromises, so you're never happy with them, right? And it still has a lot of the spirit of what I want to do, but isn't quite as good as what I would want to do. And next year I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm going to be at a very different kind of school, and I suspect I'll be able to do pretty much anything I want. So we'll find out.
So you're saying you're not always able to do exactly the way you want it, but you can still mostly do the main idea of standards-based grading.
I think had I stayed another year, I'm not sure if I would be able to continue to do it, but those are not useful hypotheticals at this point because we're kids.
For me, it's very rare for us to teach a class that has multiple sections. The last time I did it was before I was doing standards-based grading. But if I were to imagine myself doing it in that situation, when we do multiple sections, we don't tend to have common exams. So I still feel like I would have had the flexibility to do it. As far as pushback is concerned, I get a lot more pushback on the fact that I concentrate more on the concepts than on the mathematics. So I'll have, for example, one of my colleagues, when he teaches advanced quantum, he has them normalize every single function under the sun. Normalize this, normalize that, normalize this, normalize that. And I'll have them normalize something once, and then I'll have them use Mathematica from then on. I get a ton of pushback on that. So it's interesting that I don't really feel like I get a lot of pushback on sort of my grading scheme, because clearly my colleagues do push back on some things, but they tend not to push back on that.
Do you get pushback on using Mathematica rather than Python?
No.
That's our
MATLAB partisan
joke. Python versus Mathematica. So I had to bring it in. We always have it. So.
Yeah. So we had a guy like last year. We had a visitor, or a couple of years ago, we had a visitor who was really into this, and he's the guy who got me to start playing around with the standards-based stuff. But he got everybody to agree to do it for the multiple sections for 2 terms. But one of the people who did that has said never again. He found the standards-based grading to be just way too time-consuming. He said he felt it took 4 times as long to grade and produced maybe a 10% improvement in student understanding, and he said he'll never do it again. That ended up turning, I think, on the question of reassessments, where the visitor we had was big in, you can, at any time, you can request to reassess a particular standard and do it again. And then he just, for whatever reason, just got besieged by those. And, I had it in the syllabus, and I said, if you're unhappy with your grade on a particular standard, you can ask me to reassess. And I think it was just the luck of the draw. The students I had, 3 or 4 times I had students say, I'd like to reassess this standard, and I said, sure, send me email with a time you can meet to do it. And then I never got an email. And so I didn't have that come up at all, and I didn't have that time sync. So there is some bookkeeping time that goes into it, and that I'm not putting a single number into a column of a spreadsheet, and I have to have a separate page for each student, and many rows of standards. But nah, that's not.
I just replace the last grade. I just change it, and then if I ever need to look back, I just go to review changes. But I don't. I'm just. for me, it's just mostly a philosophy, and I try to do the easiest technical part that I can. So I think it's a great idea to keep track of the progress of students and all that stuff, but I just don't do that. So
I was struck today because I'm doing the individual grades. I did after the first exam, I gave them the if the class ended today, letter grade, and then I did that again today. And when I was putting those together, it was actually really striking how few of them changed. Like there were a couple of people who were kind of borderline, were like B+ who moved up to A-, or were B+ moved down to B, but very few of them moved any significant distance in terms of the grade. They pretty much, the grade they have after the second exam is pretty much the grade they had after the first exam.
What's interesting about that to me is on the first day of most of my classes that are standards-based grading classes, I always ask them, I say, look, who has an example of either a test grade or a whole score, a whole class grade that you received that's far away from your expectations or what you thought? Either you got a better grade than the work you put in, or you got a way worse grade. And it's great because, of course, they all have plenty of examples, and I want them to talk about those times when they bombed a test yesterday, but this morning woke up and realized how to do it. So they have had experiences where traditional grading has not been a fair measure of their actual knowledge, certainly not their knowledge at the end of the term. And so when I have that conversation, they kind of get excited about the notion. I say, look, you can keep hammering away and show me that you know it. All I care about is that you know all of it by the end of the semester. And I find that I get a lot of buy-in. And so when you say that you see students not really changing a whole lot from exam to exam, it seems to me that one interpretation could be that they're pigeonholed. They're like, oh, that's it. That's what they get. But I think that the standards-based grading allows for them to dig deeper if they want to. Now, if you're not getting a ton of reassessment requests, maybe they're right where they feel it's a fair measurement of their grade. If you ask them that, would they say that's fair?
I think that's probably a lot of what's going on. I think we definitely have students who they're shooting for a threshold.
Yeah.
Right, and they want to clear some particular bar, and as long as their grade is going to be above that threshold, which varies from individual to individual, as long as they're going to do well enough, then beyond a certain point they don't worry about it that much. And so I think there are other courses and other subpopulations of students who I think would maybe be more consistently gung-ho to really nail everything. But I've got a few who are really, they want to get every I dotted and every T crossed, and I got a few who are like, yeah, sure, that's fine.
So since we have Andy and Kelly here, I would like to ask, especially of them, and then Chad, we can give our answers too, but let's suppose that you had a colleague that was interested in starting standards-based grading, and you could give them a couple pointers, starting pointers. What would you think be the most important thing that they would consider to start off with?
Go ahead, Kelly.
That's nice. I don't know. Like, write some standards first. Like, you have to have a clear. I guess the first important thing is you have to have a clear reason for why you want to do it, and what you expect to get out of it. Otherwise, I could see it definitely going poorly for someone who was just like, oh, that sounds good, or I don't know. Have a clear idea of why you want to do it, because that will guide all the choices you make. And then the other piece of advice for someone who's starting out is don't tell all the students everything to like the last detail of exactly how it's going to work, because you're going to change your mind about how you want to do it the first time you do it in the middle of things. And if you lock yourself in, then you're kind of guaranteeing it's going to go poorly, because the students will be upset because you're changing things, even if they're changing things that lead better. Like the change is always comes at some grumbling cost. So, yeah.
For me, I think that I would ask the person, what are they crabby about? I'm constantly trying to figure out, what am I crabby about? What made me crabby this semester in my teaching, and is there anything that I can do to address that? For me, what that ends up being is that I'm a little zigzaggy, right? So I make a correction, then I overcorrect, and I come back and I overcorrect again. But I'm motivated to work on that. And so, for example, if you take this Frank, I always attribute it to Frank Noscasi, his "Who do you want to pack your parachute" slide that I think I could dig up if we had to, right? I love showing that to people. I say, look, this is so obvious who you would want to pack your parachute. It's the guy who just improved, and by the end of the semester was nailing it. And the person who nailed it at the beginning and just did worse and worse and worse throughout the semester, it's obvious we wouldn't want that person to pack the parachute. The question is, and I think this is exactly what Kelly was saying when you say have them write some standards, is that how you think about teaching physics? Do you really want them to still know the week one's material in week 14? And if so, standards-based grading can help with that crabbiness if you're crabby about it. But honestly, I have a colleague who I don't think is crabby about much. His classes go really, really well. He's a very traditional grader. He gets fantastic out-of-this-world student evaluations. His students come out strong. They do well in my classes. He's not crabby about much, so I don't think that I would put this to him.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. If you don't see problems with the way it's done right now, it's kind of hard to change just to change. And I think if someone told you to change it to some other way of grading and you didn't see the motivation, then that would be what you're crabby about, right?
Yeah.
But I think that personally, the most important thing is the philosophy of what Kelly said. What is a grade supposed to be? What do you want it to be? I think a lot of people get caught up with, well, that's the way it's done. You do this one test, you do another test, and then I average those, and that's your grade, and that's the end of the story. I don't like to think of it that way. I like to think of it as more like a measuring stick, and I want to measure where they are. And it doesn't really matter if I do it out of order. It doesn't matter if they did poorly on a test first and they show that they actually know it later. I mean, they know it at the end of the semester, then they deserve the grade that reflects that understanding. But then I think the key thing is a lot of people have a lot of details about how they do it, and if you try to get too caught up in which grade counts first, how do you record them, and all this other stuff, you're just going to go crazy, and you're not going to have fun. So.
Yeah, the thing that convinced me it was worth giving a shot was I realized when I was making up an exam for the intro class I was teaching, I was like, okay, I need a problem that tests whether they can do the momentum principle. I need a problem that tests whether they can do the momentum principle with changing forces. I need an energy principle problem. And I'm like, what I'm doing when I'm making up the test is essentially I have a mental list of standards that I'm going through, and I was okay, I need something that tests this standard, this standard, this standard, this standard. If that's how I'm making up the test, I might as well report the grade to them in the same way, because that's really the thing I want to know is, can these people do these, this list of things? And you may as well, if that's what I'm trying to get, giving them back just a single number, and then they have to try and parse out which pieces of it they need to work on. That's less efficient than just admitting up front that I am after things that test this, and this. The practical advice that I would have is the first go round we had with it, we ended up with something like 85 standards for classical mechanics, and it was too much. It was it was this monster list of things. This term I've cut it down. Last term and this term I've cut it down to between 30 and 40. And a bunch of them lump a few things together, but I also broke them out in levels. So I have there's level 1 standards that are very much qualitative understanding of what does it mean for there to be a current in a circuit, and qualitatively, can you draw the direction of an electric field vector properly that goes out from a positive charge in toward a negative charge. And then level 2 is can you calculate the current from Ohm's law? Can you calculate the magnitude of the field due to a point charge? And level 3 is a little more advanced, and then I do some black magic math to map that onto ABC grades. But cutting the number of things down to make it a little more manageable was a big help.
I think Kelly agrees. She was nodding.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy to make too many standards and compartmentalize every single thing, and I think you also need to have the bigger picture, and that means fewer standards. Like, I don't know, you have to like decide on what level you want to really focus students' effort, right? Like when they realize, okay, I don't have a yes on this, I need to work on it. Like, in what way? Like, on what level do you want them to start working? You know?
Yeah. The other thing we were trying to do that ended up not working as well as it might have. We were trying to have questions on tests and questions on homeworks that only hit one standard at a time, and that ended up not being very satisfying for anybody because you end up with a bazillion questions on things, and then and then that sort of knocks out problems where you have to do something integrative, right? Where you have to put together a few different ideas to get something, and that ended up being more hassle than it was worth.
Yeah, for me, I almost never give them a problem that only tests one thing at once, and it's important to me that I'm giving them feedback and reporting things about what they've done on a level that's specifying which skills they did well, but I'm not testing them like in a cherry-picking kind of way where they're just testing on one thing at a time. And also, when I give them, just for like efficiency of paper and stuff, usually the standards are printed on the back with a space for me to put a score, so I don't have to print out like a second piece of paper for a quiz. But I also usually put extra things in that list that are not necessarily going to come up on the quiz, and it's taken some of them the entire year to figure that out. But because I don't want it to be like, oh, I'll look on the back. Oh, I'm supposed to do this. Okay, I'll do that. No, they need to be able to choose which model, fundamental principle they want to use.
Yeah, last term when I was the only one doing it, I did for the exams. I had all the standards on the cover sheet, but I had every single standard code on the cover sheet, so it didn't actually provide any information about what was going to be tested or not. And that drove a couple of kids nuts. So. But.
Andy, do you have any final words?
Well, I was just going to say one thing that it reminded me of was when I gave a quiz in my Sound of Music course, these were non-majors, I said, okay, well, here's the 3 or 4 standards that we're going to cover. So I did sort of tell them which standards they were, and here's 2 or 3 problems to show me you can do it. The problem was the students were so fixated on the fact that there was 2 or 3 problems, so that when I gave them 3 scores, they thought that there was 1 score was for each problem. I said, no, the problems I graded holistically. The 3 scores you got were for the 3 standards that were present on that quiz, and they just really had a hard time separating that, right? So, and in fact, one student put a lot of work into a particular problem and really went off on a tangent, and I ended up scoring them, not full credit. And they said, "But I worked so hard on this." I said, "Yeah, but all the work you were doing wasn't really responding to the standard. Read how the standard reads. It says you really know how to do the Doppler effect or something like that, and you went off and did something that didn't have to do with Doppler effect." And so that student, I think, finally was slowly learning that, he's grading me on the standards, and he's giving me some context to do that. And when I could get across to students that notion, then I think it went better.
So it's the class is called The Sound of Music?
It's called The Physics of Sound and Music.
So it's not The Sound of Music, because you could get in big trouble for that, right?
The hills are alive. So. It's and then of course your quiz is really easy because it's Maria, and then you decide how do you solve a problem like Maria. So.
That's good. That's good. All right.
That's awful.
I think we did. This is our first time with guests, and I think that we did pretty well. I like it. What do you think, Chad?
That was fun.
Yeah.
So. And I gotta say, I like the goalless problem idea, but that's one where I definitely despair of. We have a policy that we do common exams when we have multiple sections, and there's no way I would convince anybody else to do that.
I can see the conversation now. So I want this problem, but there's not a question on there. It's just a problem.
It's just a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like for me there are 2 different uses for them. One is for showing off on the exam, but then the more frequent use of them is just like all the stuff we do after a little while starts to become all goalless problems. Like introducing projectile motion, when I have a class, especially if it's an honors class or something, there's no lab, there's nothing. It's just, there's this thing falling. Go, and by the end of that, they realize, oh, I can find all these things about it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds good. All right. Well,
Okay.
thanks, Andy and Kelly, for sharing some time with us. We enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Thanks very much. This was fun.
Yeah. We'll have to do it again sometime.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
All right. Take care.